Presentation today is from, now everyone laughs at me when I say Keishii's name because there's two I's at the end, and so I'm always trying to make sure I pronounce the I so they think I say Keishii. Keishii. So, and so I like her topic. In fact, it seems a whole lot like the example that I've been using all year with the conservation of rainforests. But she did a really good job talking about coral reefs instead. Excellent job. Here are Keishii's words. I would like to thank my mom for her constant support, Mr. Wade for guiding me through the thesis, Ms. Peeping for being the best advisor and guiding me through the writing and practicing my thesis, Miss Monique and Mr. Joel for being my panelist, and my friends for the constant support and encouragement, especially Natasha, who accompanied me to do my thesis during rhetoric class and encouraged me to finish it. Keishii's title is Finding Nemo, Why Indonesia Should Prioritize Coral Reef Conservation. Give me just a second to set the timer up, and I'll let you know when you can start. You can start when ready.
Consider for a moment that today is the day when your long-cherished dream would at last unfold to life. For the past couple of weeks, your thoughts are filled with the vibrant corals and the splendor of the Raja Ampat marine life. And so, with a moment of hesitation, you cast aside your diving gear and jump into the waiting waters immediately. Down you go, deeper and deeper, anticipation filled, until at last you open your eyes. Where once stood vibrant corals, now stood ashen gray skeletons. Where once schools of fish glided, only a few remnants lingered. Your dream, your long-awaited dream was a lie. It is nowhere to be found. However, let me be clear. This is not a horror story. It is the harsh reality of our time today. It is here and it is happening in Indonesia. Indonesia, once the richest in marine biodiversity, watches its reefs fade away. To conserve its reefs is to conserve Indonesia's future. We must not neglect the reefs. Throughout history, the ocean covers 71% of the Earth's surface and has significantly influenced Earth weather patterns, atmospheric gases, and human welfare by distributing water and heat across the globe. Early marine conservation started during the 20th century when people began to be aware of the environmental harm caused by human activities. However, by the 1960s and 70s, conservation gained momentum due to concerns about overfishing, pollution, and habitat destruction. That is when countries start to create marine protected areas, or MPAs, and the formation of international agreements like the London Dumping Convention and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. Indonesia, the world's largest archipelago, is located within the Coral Triangle, covering 51,000 kilometers squared, or 18% of the world's reefs. Marine industries like tourism and fisheries contribute around $2.4 billion annually. As a result, the Indonesian government is responsible in balancing its economic development and its long-term conservation efforts. Corals are cnidarian invertebrates made of polyps that can form hard or soft feather-like structures, living symbiotically with the zooxanthellae algae that provide food and color through photosynthesis. The IUCN defines a protected area as a clearly defined space that ensures the long-term benefits of conservation of nature and its ecosystem services. the Indonesian Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries has established 23.9 million hectares of MPAs by 2020 and aims to establish 32.5 million hectares of MPAs by 2030. Backed by the 1945 Constitution, the government manages these MPAs, locally known as Kawasan Konservasi Perairan, at both national and provincial levels, currently at 411 locations. These protected areas act like banks for nature, safeguarding ocean biodiversity for future generations. In 2015, 70% of Indonesia's coral reefs were in critical condition and at serious risk without immediate conservation action. Human activities like the usage of trawls and unregulated activities remain a major threat to marine life, raising growing concern over the need for stronger protection. Indonesia should prioritize coral reef conservation for 3 reasons. Conservation of corals can create jobs and boost economic growth through ecotourism, reduce the detrimental effects caused by human activities, and promote appreciation and love for God's creation. Indonesia is known for its impressive biodiversity and rich marine life, with vibrant corals and various fish species, making it a destination for tourism. Coral reefs and diving activities can serve as a basis for flourishing ecotourism. Implementing user fees in ecotourism can generate sustainable financing for conservation efforts. Several countries like Bonaire, Palau, and Belize use ecotourism fees to fund marine conservation, with fees supporting park management, research, and local communities. In Bonaire, divers are charged, while Palau sets a $15 to $30 fee per tourist, and Belize includes a 3.75 airport fee for conservation projects. Belize also implements a quota system for fishing, harvesting, and tourism, which includes having size limits, gear restrictions, and no-take zones. These examples show that user fees and quota policies, when well managed, can finance marine conservation and support economic development as well as monitor harvest, a system Indonesia could adopt to enhance conservation and ecotourism. As the ecotourism market grows, Indonesia can secure itself as a top and primary destination, offering experiences like diving, snorkeling, and sunbathing. With ecotourism already contributing 45% to its tourism revenue, Indonesia should strike while the iron is hot to meet the growing demand for sustainable travel options. Considering that the global ecotourism market, valued at $216.49 billion in 2023 and expected to reach $759.93 billion by 2032, the potential for both revenue and marine protection is immense. The biodiversity of Indonesia's coral reefs will bring tourism here if conservation efforts are successful. With reefs home to 75% of the world's coral species, Indonesia possesses extraordinary ecotourism potential. Compared to Palau, whose MPAs contribute around $90 million annually, Indonesia, with a larger coastline, can generate even greater returns by adopting similar strategies. For instance, sites like Badul Island shows promise, and strategies like user fees and marine protected areas could generate conservation funding. However, threats like overfishing, pollution, and climate change continue to endanger reefs, making it clear that conservation policies are needed to preserve and ensure Indonesia's success. Conservation can reduce the detrimental effects caused by human activities. Thus, Indonesia should invest in coral reef conservation. Human activities negatively impact coral reefs, and conservation efforts can reduce these effects by implementing sustainable practices and raising awareness among communities. Unregulated diving and fishing can cause direct physical harm to coral reefs, leading to long-term degradation that is difficult to reverse. Think of overfishing like removing bricks from a wall. Each fish is like a brick. Even if some are replaced over time, eventually the wall will crumble, just like the ecosystem breaking down without fish. The research coordinator of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, Andrew Buckner, highlights how fish are important for reef health because they control algae growth, and their decline allows algae to overgrow and eventually stressing corals. Studies also argued that conservation helps us track and manage fishing and tourism, helping prevent overexploitation and harm. By creating marine protected areas, we give ecosystems a chance to heal from human activities and encourage responsible fishing. Researchers also observe that in places like the Philippines, Australia, and Bonaire, well-managed MPAs have demonstrated that fish populations are rising and reefs are better adapted to environmental changes. Another reason that conservation can strictly define what activities are allowed and prohibited inside a conservatory. Tourism activities like fishing and diving can stress corals if not correctly managed. Encouraging authorities to establish guidelines for sustainable tourism. These guidelines aim to minimize damage, such as harmful contact during diving or irresponsible beach activities. An example of physical harm is the usage of sunscreen with oxybenzone, which contributes to coral degradation with 14,000 tons entering reef areas annually, with 90% of snorkeling and diving occurring in just 10% of the world's reefs. Coral bleaching threatens up to 40% of coastal reefs worldwide. There is also a strong connection between healthy coral reefs and the well-being of coastal communities. Healthy coral reefs protect coast, an important aspect for communities living along the coastlines of Indonesia. Coral reefs are the lungs of the ocean. Protecting them from further degradation helps lessen the impacts of climate change and sea level rise on coastal communities. Coral reefs act as natural barriers, reducing wave energy and minimizing coastal erosion, with studies showing that well-maintained reefs protect shorelines during storms. The World Bank estimates that 7 million Indonesians depend on fisheries for income. This highlights the importance for coral reef conservation. Thus, effective conservation supports sustainable tourism, fisheries, and biodiversity. Examples like the Great Barrier Marine Park Authority or the GBR-MPA and Coral Restoration Foundation or the CRF that eventually improves and restores the reef's ability to withstand climate change. In other words, conservation can reduce pollution and improve coral health. Another example is the sasi practice done by the indigenous people of Maluku, an effort to conserve natural resources on both land and sea by setting a specific period of time to take or harvest resources. By adopting similar strategies like the CRF and the GBR-MPA with local involvement like the sasi practice, Indonesia can achieve effective coral reef restoration and conservation. A final reason why Indonesia should invest in coral reef conservation is not only that conservation helps us appreciate God's creation, but also to become better stewards of God's creation and to ensure that local people who depend on these marine life will maintain a sustainable coexistence. Thus, the Bible teaches that we are responsible for caring for God's creation, which includes protecting the environment and being good stewards of the earth. The Bible also calls on humans on Jeremiah 29 verse 7, caring for our environment, which says, "Seek the peace and prosperity of the city which I have carried you into exile." Jeremiah means by that verse is that humans should work for the good of the nation under whose government they live in, and take care of our environment for our well being and community. Studies also emphasize that caring for the earth is a spiritual responsibility, a way to honor God by preserving what He has created for us. When societies work to save coral reefs, they protect what God has created for humans, thus following this teaching and improving human lives and communities. Conservation also unites people and empowers communities to actively protect marine life, aligning with the stewardship principles God wants humans to do. An example of successful community-led conservation is Belize's Fragment of Hope project, which engages local fishers and staff in sustainable coral reef management. When communities take part in conservation, it creates impactful and sustainable results. Another example is the previously mentioned sasi practice done by the indigenous people of Maluku, passed down to generations involving locals. Proverbs 11, verse 14 also says, "Victory is won through many advisors." This verse highlights the importance of guidance and teamwork that can be done in this context. Research also shows that community engagement improves coral reef restoration and management. This collaborative approach aligns with biblical stewardship that promotes care for marine environments and ensuring environmental and human survival. Protecting coral reefs is important because they keep the ocean healthy and provide food and income for people relying on the sea as their primary source of income. Globally, coral reefs support nearly 1 billion people through fishing and tourism, with 500 million depending on them for food and income. These ecosystems generate billions of dollars each year and protect over 200 million people from coastal damage and flooding. As climate change worsens, degraded reefs would only make things more dangerous due to rising sea levels and storm risk. Protecting corals ensures ecosystem resilience, food security, economic stability, and disaster prevention, which aligns with the biblical stewardship principles. Although the arguments above are convincing, some might argue that Indonesians who depend on the marine as their source of income will suffer. However, Core Map states that conservation efforts in Indonesia have reduced illegal and harmful fishing practices by 60%, with Gianto and research crediting local community and involvement for this success. These programs not only protect reefs but also create alternative jobs such as ecotourism. As fish populations recover from healthier reefs, local communities get more opportunity, which includes fisheries that will ultimately benefit economically and environmentally. Some might argue that ecotourism fees will discourage people from visiting and making conservation not bringing in money. Studies highlights that sustainable ecotourism can in fact provide income for locals. While the cost of visiting protected areas may be high, we can use a tiered pricing that can make ecotourism more accessible and fund coral reef conservation. Effective management of coral reefs improves biodiversity, benefiting both fisheries and ecotourism. Throughout this thesis, we have discussed the importance of coral reef conservation and its impact on biodiversity, coastal areas, and economic sustainability. Conservation efforts such as MPAs, sustainable tourism regulations, and restoration projects have successfully reversed the damage. Indonesia can follow other countries by safeguarding these corals, protecting marine species, and securing the livelihoods of millions of Indonesians who depend on the ocean for food and income. Now, imagine standing on a beach in Raja Ampat, watching the glimmering golden sunrise over the clear waters, hearing the waves as we hop in our boat, eager and excited with our snorkeling gears, we see fish swimming in and out the vibrant corals. As we hop in, you see manta rays and sea turtles hovering above your head. This is the vision of flourishing Indonesia. However, it is in our hands to make Indonesia into this scenario today. And it begins with coral reef conservation. As Indonesian citizens, it is not just the responsibility of the government and scientists. It requires an action from all of us. Simple actions and choices, such as throwing trash to its rightful place, or reducing plastic waste, and even supporting eco-friendly businesses and products, and most importantly, being responsible and using reef-safe sunscreen. Governments and organizations must also continue to strengthen management of conservation programs. As the saying goes, we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. Today's actions will determine the world left behind to ensure our descendants will live on a thriving planet. Thank you.
Great job, Keishii. Our panelists today are Ms. Monique and Mr. Joel. We'll start with Ms. Monique.
Okay, well done, Keishii. Yeah, you did so great explaining everything, and of course that I could see that how you have a big heart to save the corals in Indonesia. Hopefully that it's going to be well implemented, yeah, someday. Okay, so now let me go straight to the first reason, talking about the economic growth through the ecotourism. So my question is, pardon me if I couldn't find any evidence, but then I'm just curious that, is there any evidence that you can share with us that claim that the fees you got from the ecotourism can be a sustainable income for the conservation?
Thank you, Ms. Moni, for your
Yes.
question. However, I would like to clarify, is it for the examples that I show or is it for Indonesia?
For the Indonesia.
Oh, okay. So actually, Indonesia have not implemented user fees as specifically for coral reef conservation. However, an example that I can show you is the Komodo Island. It's one of the conservation that if you want to enter Komodo Island, you need to pay a certain amount, and this actually shows that it can serve as a sustainable financing for Komodo Island. And in my thesis, I'm trying to say that Indonesia should do this widespread fees for even coral reef conservation.
Ah, I see. Okay. So, do you think when you are saying sustainable conservation funding, let's say, do you think that, or do you mean that the government investment will be lesser, or still that we need have more from the government?
Thank you for your pointing that out. So for now, the government already invests a certain amount, and I believe that we need to invest for the first periods. We're gonna need to invest more for the government. However, after a certain period of time, if the place or that conservation itself can fund itself with the sustainable financing for long term, the government will invest less in the conservation itself.
Okay. So now probably next question. You, Keishii, yeah, what you are going to do in order to respond, let's say, if people say that they have fear that ecotourism may benefit the outsiders more than the locals. So how you are going to encourage them or manage that situation?
Okay. Thank you for the question. So eventually, ecotourism itself will benefit both parties, the locals and the tourists itself. So the tourists will enjoy a good and a great place that is well managed, while locals itself will have I can say, sort of income because these locals will act like tour guides, teachers, maybe for boats, diving, and other activities that can be done inside the conservatory.
Okay. Yeah, why I ask this question? Because, like, let's say, if we are talking about Bali, let's say, we can see that many people invest from all around Indonesia, or let's say around the world even. So the locals basically just become the workers. But then, like, the ones who invested a lot, most likely are the others or the outsiders. So is there any way that you can work with the government just to simply save the locals, therefore that you can have like imbalance, so it's not going to be like it seems undertaken by the outsiders? Is there any way for you to do that, or with whom that you are going to work together?
Okay, thank you for your question. So the first step for that is the government itself. So for in that case, I can say that Bali is a very top tourist destination in Indonesia, right? And Balinese eventually act as the workers, like what you say. I believe that these Balinese people, they act as workers, but then they do it for their living, right? And I can collaborate. I can propose a collaboration with the government, so there will be maybe stricter rules for the tourists who come in, so they won't be taking advantage of the locals. So it won't seem like the locals will be, I can say, overworked or like taken advantage of in this case.
Okay. I pray for that.
Amen.
Okay. So next, about the biblical stewardship, like you were saying before, and the responsibility. In what ways you think that promoting stewardship, yeah, could, like, let's say, lead to the behavioral change in the local communities as well?
Okay.
So what do you think about that?
Thank you for pointing that out. So, local communities, they mostly, especially in the coastlines of Indonesia, they depend on these corals and fisheries. And by maybe, like, in a sense, telling them about these stewardship principles, they have a sense of responsibility for guarding these, and eventually it will benefit them in the future, benefit them back in the future. So it's for their own good, not only for tourists or anybody else, it's for themselves.
I see. Okay. But can you do it alone, or you think that you need the whole village or the whole community to build that
I think
awareness?
it will be better if the whole village will have these awareness. However, I believe that one person can make big changes, and this small person can eventually spread, and this awareness can lead to more conservation happening in Indonesia.
Okay. So the next question, it's a part of your argument, as basically. Um, During the research, did you find out if there's any, let's say, corruption in the conservation funds somewhere, and especially probably in Indonesia? Let's say if it's yes, then is there any way to recommend on how we are going to protect or prevent the corruption? If is there any system that we can have, therefore the funding that they get is really going to be invested 100% back for the conservation?
Okay, thank you for your question. I believe that corruption is very rooted in Indonesia, and it's going to be kind of hard to completely eliminate it. However, based on my research, Indonesia actually have a lot of budget. So Indonesia actually allocates a $47.38 million loan from the World Bank for coral reef conservation. And with the CORMAP project in my thesis, they have a 10 million grant from $10 million, not rupiah, a grant from the Global Environment Facility, and from the Indonesian government itself, there's a $5.74 million. And I believe that corruption is happening here because we cannot really see the hasil of those money being invested back. But I can propose that these funds will supposed to be given to the locals, not the central government or even like the central government or even other parties, like let's say someone who is willing to conserve it by themselves. Let's call it volunteer work. These volunteer work should be regarded and should be paid. And this payment should be used back for the coral reef conservation itself. It shouldn't be taken by the central government because the central government will undergo a long process. So it's like central government giving it to the local government to the locals. And by having this long series will have more corruption happening.
We need to move to Mr. Joel now.
Okay, thank you, Keishii, for that. That last example really highlights one of my big objections to this is you have your central government taking out loans for investment in this very thing, and we cannot quite yet discern if those monies are getting to where they're supposed to be. But it's adding to the national debt anyway. So the Indonesia has to pay for that. And it's just full of corruption. So why your thesis is prioritizing? You want to prioritize this. Why prioritize this instead of prioritizing? Let's eliminate corruption, or let's address corruption in the government and in corporations head on. Why not prioritize that?
Okay, thank you for your question. So based on my thesis title, it's prioritizing coral reef conservation over other environmental aspects, not specifically on corruption or other problems happening in Indonesia.
Okay, I was just asking Ms. Monique, what was the anti-corruption? Is it
KPK.
KPK? Yeah. So how effective has KPK been in minimizing the corruption or regulating corruption in this country?
Okay, thank you for your question. Although I do not have like a certain research because corruption is a little bit outside of my scope, I can say for sure that the KPK is one of the government body that regulates corruption, right? They have done, let's say, 20% going well on the corruption that is happening this year because based on what I see in the news so far, there's many corruptors that has already been caught, like the PT Timah thing and other corruption aspects. However, I do believe that the KPK needs to adopt a new system in which they need to improve their way of, I don't know how to say it in English, trial. They need to have a better trial system for the corruption in Indonesia.
Yeah, so you should prioritize that.
So for this title is I propose to prioritize coral reef conservation over other environmental aspects, not prioritizing it over corruption, because I believe personally that Indonesia should handle corruption, education, and corruption first for this program to succeed.
Okay, I appreciate your answer. One example that just kind of came to mind as I was listening to your presentation is your former Kementerian Kelautan, right, Ibu Susi. And if you go down to Pangandaran, there's this big shipwreck right in the most beautiful part of the beach, and that was under her administration. That was a government decision to slam a big boat into this coral reef, and they were going to create some maritime museum, and it was going to be ecotourism, and this was a good idea according to your government. And so you're advocating for more government solutions like this.
So actually, I'm not advocating them to just crash random boats into coral reefs. Although I do love Ibu Susi, I don't appreciate her for crashing that boat to Pangandaran.
And other dealings, if you go along the coast, you'll see that she has private investments in lobster farming and mutiara lobster all along the coastline. So I feel like if you bring the Indonesian government officials into bear here, they're allowed to take out loans from the IMF or the World Bank, and so there's corruption on that side, and there's going to be corruption on this private investment side where they have separate lobster things going on all along the coast. There's just so many areas where corporate greed, nepotism, and this conflict of interest is going on. But she's supposed to be guarding the reefs and really watching out for the interest of the people. I just feel like if you prioritize this, you're going to be bringing something worse down the road.
Okay. Thank you for your question. In Ibu Susi's case, she has private investments on the lobster and pearls going on in Pangandaran. I believe that these private investments are made by herself and won't be taking loans from the World Bank. And in this case, Indonesia already have a loan from the World Bank, so there's no need for them to take more loans. Especially, just recently, Indonesia and America has a debt swap happening. So Indonesia just needs to pay a small amount, and America will be sort of like erasing this debt by channeling all the money for coral reef conservation.
That's an interesting creative solution. I guess my final question is highlighting the local solutions to this. And you said Sasi out of Maluku was a good example. I would also bring Saung Angklung Ujo into the mix of he's a local private guy with a big heart, and he invested generationally into this conservation, this ecotourism, this kind of wonderful thing. That was not government run. And the Sasi of Maluku, that's a community held area, and they have conserved their natural resources way better. So I would say, what would you say to that?
Okay, so thank you for your question. For the Sasi practice, but done by the indigenous people of Maluku, actually there's a government involvement in it. The government actually sets the Sasi practice as one of the laws in the Maluku area. And actually, in my opinion, by setting this rule, Indonesia can actually establish more people into raising this awareness, and more people will actually commit to it rather than just saying or not doing anything.
All right, very good. A couple of questions, some that sort of come from your peers. I mean, there's several of your peers that ask similar questions. I'm going to put it this way. In the world of ecology, there's this kind of a dilemma, right? We want to focus on ecotourism to bring the people in for conservation, but when you bring the people in, they destroy the coral reefs, right? By sunscreen, and honestly, you watch even divers who pretend to be ecologically, who really seem to care, but you see them stepping on the reefs and breaking the reefs. How do we deal with that kind of dilemma? Isn't it true that you bring more people in, you just destroy the reefs?
Thank you for my friends and Mr. Wade for the question. So basically for that, I want to propose a quota policy, like what I also have discussed with Mr. Joel last time. Having quota policies and maybe gear restrictions and also no-take zones similar to Belize. So if Indonesia proposed this like zoning area, I can say, so there are some areas that tourists may not enter, and there are also certain aspects to it. Like for example, if these divers step the corals, I propose them to be fined or even punished for it. So I think that these quota policies for the amount of visitors, the gear restrictions, the no-take policies, and even the fines will help people to more appreciate and not treat corals as it is.
Good. So I was, I'm a certified diver from the 80s, and the first place I ever went scuba diving was Belize. You mentioned Belize. Unfortunately, if you talk to someone today, they
Yes,
say
today.
the coral in Belize is ruined, right? And they did their best. You mentioned the way they tried to do it. Do you know about those problems in Belize and what happened and what people say happened and what they're trying to do to fix them?
So based on my research, Belize's corals currently is destroyed. However, the Belize government have tried to limit and really try to limit the tourists and also implements more fees so that less people will be coming. However, I do not know exactly what other things are happening, but that's what I know so far.
Okay, very good. I think there was one other thing I was going to say. Oh yeah, so it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, right? But being a bird watcher, I like to go in the forest. I like to interact with people who are in the forest. What I see in Indonesians is this take it now while it exists mentality, right? And you mentioned this quote at the end that says that we borrow it from our children. In other words, what you're pushing is that we desire to save the reefs and the forests for our children, but I don't see that mentality here. I see while the fish are here, we take it now, and if they're gone tomorrow, we'll find something else to do. How do we change that mentality?
Thank you, Mr. Wade, for the question. So, as I've said before, I can say that corruption and greed is actually rooted in Indonesia, and it will be kind of hard to take it out. However, I can say that by actually educating the locals and having educational, I can say, institutions that can help and educate them about the importance of biodiversity, they can better understand because I can say that Indonesians have that mentality because of greed and their greed for money, especially. And they will eventually try to take the corals and sell them for their own profit. However, in the near future, they're gonna again complain to the government because their resources are gone. But actually, that's their own. They they make it happen. So it's actually according to the sustainability theory in our human geography book. So it means that what is now needs to be conserved so that it will be here for years to come. And I think that education is really needed to change this mentality.
All right, great. I made you go a little bit long today. You did a great job, Keishii. All right, so what we'll do now is we'll meet friends and family over here for photos and panelists and advisors, and then we'll start in just about 5 minutes with Rico.